Let yourself settle now. Feel the weight of your body wherever you are resting, the particular heaviness of limbs that have done their work for the day and are ready, at last, to be still. Take one slow breath in through your nose, and let it go through your mouth all the way out until there is nothing left to release. And again, breathing in and out. There is nowhere you need to be tonight. Nothing left to accomplish. The day is finished, and you are here, and that is everything. Let me take you somewhere quiet. Somewhere the world is smaller and softer than usual. Picture, if you will, a house built of pale stone at the very edge of a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea. The house is old, older than any of the people who currently live in the small town below it, and it has the particular solidity of old stone buildings, the sense that it has absorbed so many seasons and so many weathers that it is no longer entirely separate from the landscape around it. The walls are thick and cool in summer, warm in winter, and in the spaces between the stones, small plants have taken root over the years. Stonecrop and sea lavender, and a tiny fern that appears every spring in the same crack on the north-facing wall, without any encouragement or explanation. Tonight, autumn has arrived in the town below. The fishing boats are tied at the dock with their lamps unlit. The cafes along the waterfront have put away their outdoor chairs. The cat who lives in the alley beside the pharmacy is asleep in a cardboard box lined with newspaper, entirely unconcerned with the season or anything else. A light rain has been falling since late afternoon. Not heavy, not cold, just the soft, persistent rain of the Mediterranean autumn, which smells of wet cypress and stone and something faintly salt-sweet from the sea. In the lower floor of the stone house, a single lamp is burning. The room it illuminates is small and densely inhabited. 3 walls are lined with wooden drawers, the kind found in old apothecaries and botanical archives, each drawer no larger than a book, each one labeled in handwriting so precise it might have been typeset. The labels are written in a mixture of languages, Greek letters alongside Latin classifications, alongside personal notations that mean nothing to anyone but their author. Between the drawer units, framed charts and nautical maps cover every available surface. On the floor, a worn kilim rug in faded terracotta and blue. On the ceiling, a single low beam from which hangs a string of shells, not decorative, not arranged by size or color, but hung in a sequence that corresponds to a private logic known only to the person who arranged them. In the center of the room, beside the small fireplace where a fire is doing its careful evening work, sits Eleanor Arvanitis. She is 78 years old, though the number would surprise you if you did not know it. She is not a large woman. She has never been, and age has made her smaller still, in the way of certain people who compress rather than diminish. Her hair is entirely white and worn in a loose braid over one shoulder. Her hands, resting in her lap around a small white shell, are the hands of someone who has worked with them all her life. Capable, unhurried, with a particular stillness of hands that know what they are doing even when they appear to be doing nothing. She spent 30 years as a marine biologist, studying the living systems of coastlines from the Aegean to the North Pacific to the fjords of Norway. She has published papers in journals that other scientists treat with reverence. She has been cold and seasick and sunburned and exhausted, in equal and generous measure. She has spent more nights on the decks of research vessels than in ordinary beds, and she has collected, over the course of her long life, a number of things that cannot be found in any journal or filed in any institutional archive. She has collected moments, or more precisely, She has collected the shells that hold them. This is her private understanding, shared with no one and defended to no one, because it requires no defense. It is simply true, in the way that some things are true without being explicable, that the shells she gathered at the particular instance of her life's greatest peace are not merely shells. They hold something. When she lifts them to her ear in the amber quiet of this small room, she does not hear only the resonance of air inside a calcium carbonate spiral. She hears, or perhaps more accurately, she re-enters, the moment in which the shell was found. Tonight she has opened the first drawer. The drawer is lined with dark cloth, and on the cloth, nestled separately in small depressions, are the shells of her earliest years. She knows each one without looking, but tonight she reaches for a particular shell, small, white, no larger than her thumbnail, and lifts it with both hands. She holds it for a moment, then she raises it slowly to her ear. And the world of the archive room, the fireplace, the lamp, the rain on the stone outside, does not disappear exactly. It simply moves to one side, as the past moves quietly forward. She is 9 years old. The light is entirely different. Not the amber of a lamp, but the broad, direct, generous light of a Greek summer afternoon, laying itself over everything with the confidence of something that has never been refused. It is the kind of light that makes shadows sharp and colors vivid, and the surface of the sea look as though it were constructed from something denser and more valuable than water. Blue-green with a depth to it, a particular quality of blue that belongs specifically to the Aegean in late July and cannot be found in any other sea on earth. She is on the beach. Not a long beach, a small curve of pale sand between two rocky headlands, the kind of private, unassuming beach that exists in abundance along the Aegean coast, too small to attract attention and too beautiful to forget. The sand is warm beneath her, not uncomfortably warm. Warm in the way that good things are warm, with a depth to it, as though the heat has been stored in the sand since morning and is now releasing itself slowly, generously, upward into whoever lies upon it. She has been lying on her back for, she doesn't know how long. Long enough that the shape of her body has made a slight impression in the sand. Long enough that she has stopped thinking about anything in particular and has simply been here, in this specific configuration of light and heat and sound. Above her, the sky is the other blue. The sky blue, which is different from the sea blue in a way that requires looking directly at both to understand. A single cloud, long and thin and motionless, lies along the horizon to the west. No other clouds. Just the blue and the cloud, and very high above, almost invisible, the straight white line of something crossing the sky too slowly to be interesting and too high to be identified. From somewhere to her left, her father. She does not need to look. She knows exactly where he is by the sound. The slow, rhythmic sound of rope being worked through hands, the particular kind of patient, repetitive labor that fishermen perform without hurry and without boredom, because they have made their peace with it long ago. He is mending the nets that he spread across the flat rock behind the boats this morning, and he is doing it with the same unhurried competence he brings to everything connected to the sea. His name was Petros. He was not a tall man, but he occupied space with a solidity that had nothing to do with size. His hands were enormous, thick-fingered, dark from years of sun and salt water, and they moved with a precision that always surprised people who expected large hands to be clumsy. He had been a fisherman all his adult life, and before that a fisherman's son, and he carried the sea in him the way some people carry music. naturally, continuously, without needing to think about it. He was telling her a story. He had been telling her stories for as long as she could remember, always in this same unhurried way, without particular emphasis or theatrical pause, as if the stories were simply things that happened to occur to him while his hands were busy, and he was sharing them the way one shares an observation about the weather. Stories about the sea, about the creatures that lived in it, about the fishermen who had preceded him, and the things they had seen, and the things they believed about the deep water that nobody had ever proved wrong because nobody had ever been deep enough to check. Young Eleanor was not quite listening. This is important. She was not ignoring him. She loved his stories and would ask him to repeat her favorites many times over the years, but in this particular afternoon she had arrived at a state that is difficult to describe and very rarely achieved. A state in which the story and the voice and the warmth and the light and the sound of the small waves on the shore and the distant calling of gulls had all become one continuous thing. Not separate elements to be processed and understood, but a single ambient quality. The quality of this afternoon, this beach, this particular combination of the world. She was 9 years old and she was completely at rest. The waves came in small sets. You could hear them approaching, a low gathering sound building slowly, and then the hiss and push of the water up the sand, and then the long retreat, drawing small stones back with a sound like a whispered word. Then quiet. Then the next set beginning. The rhythm was not metronomic. It varied slightly with each wave, each one its own event, but it was reliable. It had been doing this on this beach long before there was anyone to listen, and it would continue long after. The constancy of it was not monotonous. It was sustaining. The wooden fishing boats were pulled up on the sand above the waterline. 3 of them, low and weathered. Their paint the color of things that have been in the sun for many seasons. Faded blue, faded white, faded red. They rested on their keels at a slight angle, and in the afternoon light their shadows fell across the sand in long dark shapes that moved imperceptibly as the sun descended. Each boat had a name painted on its bow. Her father's boat was called Eleftheria, freedom, a name he had chosen himself, though he had never in his life been elsewhere than this coastline, and had said once, when she asked him about it, that freedom was not about distance. It was about knowing exactly where you belonged. She had not understood this then. She understands it now, with perfect clarity, 70 years later. The gulls were not close. They were performing their usual circuits somewhere above the headland, visible if she turned her head, which she did not, their cries arriving on the warm air as something between sound and texture, the auditory equivalent of the warmth on her skin. Familiar, unremarkable, completely right. She reached out her hand and picked up the small white shell that lay beside her in the sand. It was nothing extraordinary. A common shell, the kind found by the thousand on any Aegean beach. But it was perfect, unbroken, unblemished, its surface smooth and its spiral complete, and when she held it up against the sky it caught the light in a way that made it briefly luminous, as though it contained its own small source of radiance. She kept it. She did not know, at 9 years old, why she kept it. She did not have a theory about shells and memories. She simply knew that this afternoon, this specific arrangement of warmth and light and the sound of her father's voice and the rhythm of the sea, was something she did not want to lose. And the shell was what was there in her hand. At the moment the feeling was most complete. In the archive room, old Eleanor lowered the shell slowly from her ear. The fireplace was still breathing its quiet warmth. The lamp still burned. The rain outside continued its gentle negotiation with the stone walls. Everything was exactly as she had left it, which was the miracle of this room, that you could travel a lifetime in a moment and return to find the present undisturbed. She held the small white shell in her open palm for a while longer and looked at it. She was thinking about her father's hands, the way they moved through the rope without looking, the way he never hurried and never seemed behind. She was thinking about the quality of that afternoon, which had seemed at the time like any other summer afternoon, unremarkable given, and which she now understood to have been exceptional, not because anything dramatic happened, precisely because nothing dramatic happened, and yet it was one of the most complete hours of her life. She set the shell carefully back in its depression in the drawer. She sat with the fire for a while longer, listening to the rain. Then she closed the drawer and rested her hands in her lap, and allowed the evening to be quiet around her. Let your breath slow now. Let the warmth of that summer afternoon stay with you. The sand, the light, the sound of small waves on a quiet shore. Your body is heavy and still. Your thoughts are becoming softer, less insistent. There is nothing required of you right now. Nothing at all. Sleep is coming. Let it. Come back to the quiet. If your thoughts have wandered, and they may have, thoughts do, simply let them settle again, the way disturbed water settles when nothing more is added to it. You don't need to force anything. Just breathe slowly, and let the story find you again. The archive room. The rain outside. The single lamp. Eleanor has made tea. The pot is ceramic, round-bellied, in a deep blue that has faded toward gray at the rim from years of use. She fills her cup without particular attention. This is a gesture she has performed so many times that it requires no thought, and carries it back to her chair by the fireplace, settling into it with the ease of someone returning to a place that knows them. The fire has settled since the previous chapter, the wood having burned down from flame to a more composed radiance. Deep orange coals that throw a steadier, softer light than open flame, and a warmth that seems to come from everywhere at once rather than from any single point. She has chosen the second drawer tonight. From it she removes a shell that is small and gray, the gray of deep water on an overcast day, the gray of academic buildings in northern cities, the gray of a particular November afternoon that she has carried in her chest for over 50 years. She knows it immediately by touch, without looking. She has held it so many times in the dark that her fingertips have memorized its every contour. She raises it to her ear, and the archive room leans quietly to one side, and another world leans in. She is 20 years old. The city is not the Aegean. This city is northern, older, graver, built of stone that is a darker and more serious gray than the pale limestone of her childhood coast. It is a university city, the kind that has been a university city for so long that the institution and the place have become inseparable, each one giving the other its character. The streets near the old college buildings are narrow and cobblestoned, and the buildings themselves, stone, with tall windows and carved details and the general air of structures that consider themselves to be making a statement, rise on either side like distinguished elderly relatives who are very comfortable with their own importance. It is November. The specific afternoon that the gray shell holds is a Thursday in November. She knows this with the certainty that certain memories carry, the feeling of knowing not only what happened but the precise temporal address of it. Thursday. Mid-afternoon, perhaps 2 o'clock, perhaps half past. The sky outside the library windows is the color of the shell she will collect this evening. A uniform, featureless gray, not unpleasant, not threatening, simply present. The kind of sky that asks nothing and promises nothing and provides a neutral background against which other things become vivid. The library itself is very old. Its proper name is long and formal and involves the names of benefactors who died centuries ago, but the students call it simply the old library, to distinguish it from the newer building across the quad, which is modern and well-lit and entirely without atmosphere. The old library has atmosphere to spare. Its reading room, the one Eleanor occupied on this particular Thursday, is a long, high-ceilinged hall with tall windows running the length of both walls, dark wooden shelving rising to the gallery level, and a series of long oak tables running down the center, their surfaces worn smooth by the hands and forearms of generations of readers. At this hour, the room is nearly empty. A young man near the far end has been asleep over his books for at least 30 minutes. Eleanor had watched him lose the battle with wakefulness in a series of slow, dignified descents until his forehead finally came to rest on his crossed arms, and he had not moved since. An older woman, a lecturer perhaps from the look of the paper spread before her, sat 3 tables away with her back very straight and her attention absolute, her pen moving across a sheet of paper with the regularity of a machine. And Eleanor at her own table near the middle window. Her books are spread before her. Marine biology in the early stages, the foundational texts, the ones that speak with absolute confidence about the physical properties of seawater and the taxonomies of coastal organisms. She has read the assigned chapters and made her notes in the margins in the small, dense handwriting she will use all her life. Annotations that record not only facts but questions, not only answers but doubts, the beginning of a scientific mind that will serve her for decades. But she is not reading now. She is looking at the window. The rain began perhaps an hour ago, while she was deep in a chapter about tidal zones, and she had registered it the way one registers something welcome. A slight shift of attention, a quiet internal acknowledgement. Now she is watching it with the full attention she had been giving the textbook. The drops arrive on the glass and join with others and stream downward in the branching, wandering paths that rainwater always finds on glass, each rivulet choosing its own particular route, influenced by imperceptible variations in the surface and the angle and the wind, so that no 2 paths are ever exactly alike. She has been watching this for some time. Her tea is warm. This is important. The cup is white porcelain, slightly chipped at the handle, from the trolley that a college servant wheels through the reading room at 2:30 each weekday afternoon, a tradition so old that it would not have occurred to anyone to question it. The tea is strong and plain, and Eleanor holds the cup in both hands the way she has always held cups of hot things, feeling the warmth travel through her palms. Somewhere outside, not close, perhaps 4 or 5 streets away, the bell tower of the old church is marking the half-hour. The sound arrives through the thick stone walls of the library as something between a tone and a feeling, not sharp, not loud, but present, resonant, rolling through the air of the reading room and then receding and then quiet. The young man across the room goes on sleeping. The older woman's pen goes on moving. The rain goes on falling. And Eleanor, at her window table with her open textbooks and her cooling tea and her rain-wet view of the courtyard below, is experiencing something that she will not have a name for until she is much older. A perfect equilibrium. Not happiness exactly, though happiness is present in it. Not peace exactly, though peace underlies it. Something that contains both and is more than either. the sense of being entirely in the right place at the right time, doing entirely the right things, and needing nothing to be different from what it is. She has been anxious in the weeks before this afternoon. The first months of university had been harder than she had expected. Not the academic work, which she found absorbing, but the social architecture of the place, its unwritten codes and hierarchies, the perpetual sense of being observed and assessed. She had come from a small Aegean town where everyone knew her father and she knew everyone's boat by sight. And she had arrived in this northern city to find herself entirely without context, which was disorienting in a way that she had not anticipated. But on this particular Thursday afternoon, all of that had temporarily receded. She did not know why. Sometimes the anxiety would lift without explanation, the way fog sometimes lifts before you can see any reason for it. This afternoon it had lifted, and what remained when it was gone was just this: the reading room, the rain, the tea, the bell. The simple, sufficient fact of being somewhere warm and dry while the rain fell outside, with good books in front of her and no immediate demand on her attention. She had picked up the gray shell on the beach the previous evening. She had walked there alone after supper, along the path that wound down through the town to the small strip of shingle below the old sea wall, and she had found it in the tidal-line in the last of the light. She didn't know, consciously, what she was starting. She had simply kept the shell. In the archive room, she lowered it from her ear. She was thinking about the young woman she had been, the quiet anxiety she carried without fully knowing she carried it, the pleasure she had found in those spare, unhurried hours in the reading room, the way the rain had made the world feel enclosed and manageable. She was thinking about how anxiety changes when viewed from sufficient distance. It does not disappear in retrospect, but it becomes proportionate. It takes its actual size, which is almost always smaller than it seemed at the time. Let us stay a little longer in that library. There are things about it worth noticing, details that would slip past the eye on first visit, but that Eleanor, having returned to this afternoon many times, has come to know as well as she knows the rooms of her own house. The way the lamplight at each reading position on the long oak tables creates individual islands of warm illumination, each one a small world, separated from the next by stretches of shadow. The way the shelves above the gallery level disappear into a dimness that makes them feel, from below, like the edge of a forest. The books up there no longer legible by title, their spines all one color in the low light, a dark, uniform, densely packed horizon. The smell of the room is of particular importance. Old books have a smell that is complex in the way of wine and simple in the way of bread. It is at once the smell of paper and of binding glue and of the specific dust that accumulates in places where people are quiet and the air moves slowly, and of something less classifiable, something that is simply the accumulated presence of a great deal of human thought existing in a small space over a long time. Eleanor has always found this smell deeply reassuring, in the same way that certain people find the smell of a bakery in the early morning reassuring, because it means that something good is being made or has been made, and that the world is organized around the making of things worth making. She watches a student enter the reading room and stop, momentarily uncertain, looking for a seat. The student is young, first year by the look of the overloaded bag, the slightly bewildered expression, and after a moment of deliberation selects a seat 3 tables away and begins to unpack with a certain elaborate inefficiency that Eleanor recognizes as the performance of being very busy, which is different from being very busy. She watches with a fondness that she would not have been able to explain and does not try to. She was that student once. She is this afternoon's version of herself now. and both feel equally real. The rain against the tall windows has found a new register. For the past hour it has been a moderate, steady rain, dependable, unpretentious, doing its work without flourish. Now it has deepened very slightly, the way a piece of music deepens when the lower register is added. The drops on the glass are larger now, and they arrive more emphatically, and the streams they form on the window's surface are faster and more numerous, branching and joining and branching again in their peculiar democracy of water. From outside she can hear, faintly through the stone, the sound of it on the cobblestones of the courtyard below, a sound she cannot quite see the source of, which gives it an abstract, textural quality, like something felt rather than heard. The older woman 3 tables away, the one with the straight back and the moving pen, has paused in her writing. She is looking up, not at anything in particular, not at the window or at another person, but at the middle distance in the way of someone who has stopped in order to think more freely, as if the page had become too small to contain the scale of whatever she is working through. Her pen is still in her hand, held lightly, resting against her fingers. Her expression is one of the most genuinely absorbed expressions Eleanor has ever seen on a human face. Total inwardness, complete withdrawal from the immediate environment, as if the room and the rain and the other people in it had simply ceased to exist for her in any meaningful sense. After perhaps 30 seconds, Eleanor is not counting, she only notices that it is a while. The woman's gaze refocuses. She looks down. She writes 3 words, pauses, writes several more. Her back remains perfectly straight. Eleanor does not know who this woman is. She has seen her here before, on other afternoons, always at the same table, always with the same quality of concentration. She will see her again on future afternoons, until she graduates and leaves this city, after which she will think of her occasionally, the particular quality of that focused inwardness, without ever knowing her name or her field or anything else about her. And this will be entirely fine. Some people exist in your memory as qualities rather than identities, as examples of something rather than as individuals, and there is nothing wrong with this. It is, perhaps, a form of respect. The bell of the tower strikes again, more distantly this time. The hour for strokes, each one resonating in the stone of the city and then slowly, slowly dissolving. Eleanor counts them without meaning to. 4 o'clock. She has been in this room since 12:30. She has read 37 pages and made notes on perhaps a third of them and drunk 2 cups of tea and watched the rain for a cumulative duration that she does not want to estimate honestly. And she has felt, for the entirety of those 3.5 hours, exactly like herself. Not an anxious version, not a performing version, not a version constructed for any particular audience or occasion. Just herself, in a room with rain and books and the smell of old paper and the low, warm sound of a building thinking. She picks up the gray shell from where she placed it on the table. She had it out for the walk here in her pocket, and it has been sitting beside her cup, and holds it for a moment. She can feel the coolness of it, the particular smoothness of its surface, and she has the half-formed thought that she is going to keep this one. That something about this afternoon, this light, this rain, this quality of being entirely unhurried in a place designed for thought, something about all of this is worth keeping. She does not know yet about the archive. She does not know that she is beginning something. She only knows that the shell feels right in her hand, and that the afternoon has been extraordinary in its ordinariness, and that she does not want to forget it. She puts the shell in her pocket. She picks up her cup, finds it cold and drinks the cold tea without minding. She turns back to her book. The rain goes on. In the archive room, old Eleanor took a sip of her own tea, which had also gone cold, and found that she did not mind either. Outside, the rain on the stone house continued its long, patient work. The fire exhaled a low, final warmth. Somewhere below, she could not hear it on most evenings, but tonight the window was slightly open and the air was completely still. Came the very distant, very faint sound of the sea against the rocks at the base of the cliff. A sound that was both the same sea she had listened to all her life and the particular expression of that sea on this specific night, which would never be repeated exactly. She closed her eyes and listened to it for a while. The library, the rain, the bell at 4 o'clock, the warmth of a cup held in both hands, even after the warmth had gone. These are the things that sustain us, she thought. Not the grand occasions, not the celebrated achievements that appear in the citations and the memorial lectures. The ordinary afternoons when nothing is required, and the rain falls steadily on tall windows, and there is tea and lamplight, and the particular comfort of being neither entirely alone nor pressed upon by company. The afternoons when you feel, without being able to say why, exactly like yourself. She returned the gray shell to its place in the drawer. She sat for a long while in the quiet. Then she let her eyes close. You are drifting now. That's good. Let the rain on the library windows come with you. That steady, patient sound of water on glass, outside and you inside, warm and unhurried. Your body has found its resting weight. Your thoughts are looser now, less formed. Let them go further. Let them dissolve. You don't need to be awake for this. Let the words come to you from a distance, from that comfortable middle place between waking and sleep where sounds are softer and shapes are less definite and the ordinary boundaries between things have begun to relax. You are very comfortable. You are very still. Your breathing is doing its quiet, unhurried work without any attention from you. Come back to the stone house if you like. Come back to the archive room with its lamp and its fire and its drawers of carefully kept memories. Or simply let the next image find you wherever you are. Eleanor has opened the third drawer. She knows what is in it before she opens it, the same way she knows the contents of all of them, not merely from memory but from something more physical, more immediate, as if the drawers and their contents have become an extension of her body over these many years of returning to them. The third drawer holds the shells of her 30s, the decade of expeditions, of grant applications and research vessels, and the kind of sustained, physically demanding scientific work that she looks back on now with a combination of pride and amazement that she was ever capable of it. From the third drawer she lifts a large shell, not enormous, but notably substantial for this collection, where most pieces are small and pocket-sized. It is the color of pale blue-gray, the color of ice seen through shallow water, the color of the sky above the Arctic Circle at 2 in the morning in June. Its surface is worn and slightly rough, not from damage, but from age, from many years of being held. She holds it now, and it is warm already, as if it has been waiting for her hands. She lifts it to her ear. She is 34 years old. The vessel she is on is called the Ingrid Hansen, and it is a research ship out of Bergen, chartered for a 6-week biological survey of the waters between Norway and Svalbard. It is not a large ship. It carries 12 crew and 8 researchers. And it is not a comfortable ship, in the way that research vessels are generally not comfortable ships, being designed for purpose rather than pleasure. The bunks are narrow. The food is adequate. The engine noise is constant and pervasive, but it is a seaworthy vessel and a well-run one. And in 6 weeks of difficult northern waters, Eleanor has learned to be grateful for that above all. Tonight, or what the clock calls tonight, which is 2 in the morning, she is on the deck. She should be sleeping. She will need to be up in 4 hours for a sampling run. She knows this. She has been lying in her narrow bunk for 2 hours, aware of the ship's motion and the engine's voice and the particular creaking of hull and fittings that she has by now catalogued and identified individually, like the voices of difficult neighbors learned over a long building. But she could not sleep. Not because of anxiety, not because of anything wrong. She could not sleep because something on the other side of the porthole kept asking her to come outside and see it. And eventually she had listened. The sky is not dark. This is the first and most fundamental thing about the night she has come out to inhabit. It is 2 in the morning in June at 70 degrees north latitude, and the sky is not dark. It is not bright either. Not the full, muscular brightness of midday. It occupies a state that has no name in temperate languages, a state that is not night and not dusk and not dawn, but something that contains suggestions of all three without committing to any of them. The light is horizontal and complex. It comes from below the horizon, refracted through layers of atmosphere, and it falls on the water with the quality of something filtered, softened, made contemplative. Everything in this light looks considered. Nothing is harsh. The sea tonight is unlike anything she has encountered in her time on the Mediterranean or the North Atlantic. It is almost completely still. Not the stillness of a calm day, which is a surface stillness with motion implied beneath. This is a deeper stillness, the stillness of cold water in cold air, of a sea that has decided tonight to cease its ordinary conversation with the wind and simply be. The surface is not glassy, there is texture to it, the slight, slow undulation of deep ocean breathing, but it is as close to a mirror as a sea can practically be, and what it reflects is the sky above. That complex, nameless light, rendered again in the water below, so that the ship seems to move through 2 skies at once, one above and one below, both equally real and equally quiet. There is fog, but not the thick, blinding fog of coastal waters. This is a high, thin mist, a veil rather than a wall, that softens the horizon and makes the boundary between sea and sky uncertain. The icebergs are out there somewhere. She has seen them in the daylight hours. Distant white forms, grave and self-contained, passing at the margins of visibility like slowly moving thoughts. In this light and this mist, they are invisible, but she can feel them. The air has a particular quality. A coldness that is not the ordinary coldness of a cold night, but the radiated cold of massive amounts of ancient ice, a cold with history to it, a cold that has been forming since long before this ship was built or this sea was charted. She is wrapped in a blanket over her cold weather gear. The blanket is wool, thick and heavy, and she has arranged it around herself so that only her face is exposed to the air. Her hands are inside it, and she holds them against her chest, and she can feel her own warmth collecting in the space the blanket creates. Her breath comes out visible, small clouds that form and then disperse immediately in the slight movement of the ship's passage through the still air. The wooden hull of the Ingrid Hansen makes sounds, not the alarming sounds of a vessel in trouble. She knows those sounds, and these are not them. These are the sounds of a healthy wooden ship doing its quiet work, the low groan of the hull flexing, imperceptible to the eye but audible as a deep, intermittent voice, The gentle tap of a loose fitting somewhere on the starboard side that she has identified and reported and accepted will not be fixed tonight. The sound of water along the hull, which is not rushing but flowing, a continuous soft presence, intimate and rhythmic. She has been sitting here for perhaps 40 minutes. She is not thinking about the research. She is not reviewing her data or planning tomorrow's sampling protocol or composing in her mind the paper that will come from this expedition. The work is there. It is always there in the background of her working mind. But tonight it has moved to a greater distance, and what has moved closer is simply this. The ship, the sea, the impossible light, the cold. The sense of being very small in a very large place. And finding this not frightening but settling. There is a particular relief, she is discovering tonight, in acknowledging scale. In standing at the rail of a small ship in the middle of a northern sea, and allowing the fact of the world's enormity to be fully real, rather than managing it at a distance. She is 34 years old and she has studied the sea for more than a decade, and she understands, intellectually, the dimensions of what she studies. But intellectual understanding and felt understanding are very different things. And tonight, in this nameless light, she feels it. The world is vast and ancient and fundamentally unhurried. Whatever worries she carries, the grant proposal due in September, the complicated professional relationships that have been requiring more management than she has energy for, the vague, persistent sense that she is falling behind some imaginary schedule of achievement, all of these, in the light of this sea at this hour, arrange themselves into their actual proportions, which are modest, which are, in the largest view, quite small. There are two other people on deck she notices now. A crewman she knows only as Eric, a young man of perhaps 25, fair-haired, competent, with a particular quality of ease that people who have spent most of their lives at sea carry in their bodies, is doing something at the forward winch. Whatever he is doing, he is not hurrying. His movements have the relaxed efficiency of long practice, each gesture leading naturally to the next without any wasted motion. He does not seem to notice Eleanor at the stern, or if he does, he makes no sign of it, and she is grateful for this. There are people with whom you can share a quiet without its becoming a social situation, and Eric is one of them. The other is Dr. Lindqvist, her colleague, her friend across these 6 weeks, who is sitting on an equipment case near the midship rail, wrapped in his own cold weather gear, holding a mug in both hands and looking at the water with the same quality of absorbed attention that Eleanor has been directing at the sea from the other end of the vessel. He is 47 years old and he has been doing sea research longer than she has, and he has the same relationship to this kind of night. Not ownership, but a deep, earned familiarity. She does not go to him. He does not come to her. This, too, is one of the things she will remember about this night. That there were 3 of them on deck, each alone in the best possible way. Alone by choice, in full knowledge of the other's presence, experiencing the night separately and therefore, in some way she could not have articulated at the time together. Shared solitude. A collective quiet that needed no words and sought none. The mist on the water has shifted slightly. In the direction they have come from, north-northeast, the heading they have been running for 18 hours, the horizon has opened slightly, and in that opening the light of the sky reaches the water directly, without the veil of fog, and the water there is a different color. Brighter, more silver, the color of very still mercury. She watches this patch of brightness for a while. It is perhaps 3 kilometers away. It might as well be on the other side of the world. Not because it is inaccessible, but because distances at sea, in this light, at this hour, do not behave the way distances on land behave. They expand. The world out here reveals more of its actual size. The ship's engine continues its low, steady register. She has spent enough time aboard vessels to have stopped consciously registering engine sound most of the time. It becomes, after a few days at sea, part of the auditory background, as unremarkable as one's own heartbeat. But tonight, in the stillness of this particular hour, she becomes aware of it again. A deep, rhythmic throb that travels through the deck beneath her feet and through the rail beneath her hands, a vibration more felt than heard, the pulse of a machine that has been running for 16 hours and will run for many more without complaint. She finds it unexpectedly comforting. The engine means the ship is healthy. The ship is healthy means she is safe. She is safe means she can stand here, at the stern rail of a vessel on a northern sea at 2 in the morning, and simply look at the light on the water. Somewhere below in the research lab, a piece of equipment is making a sound, a soft, intermittent beep that she has been hearing all week as part of the background. Data still being gathered, processes still running, the work of the expedition continuing quietly even in these hours when the people who direct it are on deck or asleep. The sea giving up its information, measured and recorded. She thinks briefly about the data they have gathered on this voyage. The samples in their sealed containers, the readings in their digital logs, the photographs and the observations. All of it will go back to the lab, back to the university, back to the journals and the conversations and the slow, careful accretion of knowledge that is how science actually works, which is nothing like the dramatic narrative that science is sometimes given in the telling, and everything like the patient, sustained, unglamorous gathering of true things over time. She is proud of this work. She will continue to be proud of it. But right now it is very far away. Right now there is only the ship and the sea and the mist and the improbable light of a northern June midnight. And the feeling. Not a thought, not a conclusion, but a feeling like warmth spreading from the center of the chest outward, that the world is fundamentally all right. Not perfect. Not without its difficulties and its griefs and its genuine troubles, which are real and which she is not dismissing. But underneath all of that, underneath the complicated surface of things, there is something that is all right. Something that has always been all right. Something that this sea, in this light, at this hour, allows her to feel directly, without the mediation of argument or analysis. The ice, somewhere nearby in the dark, breathes its ancient cold. The stars, in the brief widening of clear sky, are present in their millions. The ship moves on. She found the pale blue-gray shell the following morning, wedged in the ridged surface of a piece of tidal ice at the edge of a small floe they passed close enough to sample. She picked it up with one gloved hand and turned it over and felt, even through the thick insulation, the profound cold of it. The cold of something that had been in this water for a long time, absorbing its temperature, becoming, in some sense, of the same substance as the sea that had shaped it. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket. In the archive room, she lowered the shell gently from her ear. The fire. The lamp. The night outside, which had grown very still. The faint, barely perceptible sound of the sea below the cliff. She was very still in her chair, and she remained that way for a long while, not thinking with any precision but inhabiting the memory the way one inhabits a room one loves, without inventory, without analysis, without any desire to change or improve upon what is simply, naturally there. The enormous, still, pale-lit sea. The fog at the horizon. The ship and its sounds, its pulse, its warmth against the surrounding cold. She closed the third drawer. The fire exhaled. Let yourself go further now. You are very deeply relaxed. I can tell by the quality of your stillness, the evenness of your breath. The cold, clear light of that northern sea is still with you, still spreading, still settling over everything. Let it. Let your thoughts become as still as that water. Let the distance between you and wakefulness grow. You are going further. That is good. That is exactly right. You are almost asleep. Stay with me just gently. You don't need to hold on, don't need to concentrate. Just let the sounds come. Let the images come softly. Let them be like objects glimpsed through water. Present, recognizable, but soft at the edges, without the hard definition of waking things. Your body is heavy. Your hands are still. You are completely at rest. The archive room. The rain has eased to almost nothing now. Just the occasional tap on the window glass, as though the evening is reminding itself that it had been raining and doing so out of courtesy rather than conviction. From the fourth drawer, Eleanor takes a shell that is rougher than the others. Not damaged. The structure is intact, but weathered, worked over by years of wind and tide. Its surface abraded to a matte texture that catches the light differently than a smooth shell does. It is the color of old wood or old rope, or the stone of a building that has been in the salt air for a very long time. She knows this shell without seeing it. She holds it, and she can already feel what is inside it, the way you can feel a familiar song begin before the first note sounds, because you know the shape of it in your chest. She puts it to her ear. She is 43 years old. The lighthouse stands on a small island. Not a proper island, more precisely a rock large enough to have been built upon, connected to the mainland at low tide by a causeway of pebble and flat stone that disappears for 6 hours in every 12 beneath a meter of gray Atlantic water. The lighthouse itself is old, built in the 1870s of cut granite blocks, painted white on the seaward side and bare stone on the landward, with a lantern room at the top that still turns and still casts its reliable light across the shipping lanes, because ships still pass this coast and rocks are still where they always were. Eleanor is living here for 3 months. Not an official posting. She was no longer young enough to be assigned to remote stations, and the lighthouse has been automated for decades. She has rented the keeper's cottage, a low stone building attached to the base of the tower, from the coastal authority at a rate that reflects its inconvenience and lack of amenities, and she is here because she needed to be somewhere exactly like this. The year before had been difficult, not catastrophic. She is not the kind of person for whom things become catastrophic, or perhaps she is the kind of person who does not permit herself to call them that. But difficult. The end of a long research partnership with a colleague she had trusted, a professional dispute that had taken more from her than she had realized while it was taking it. A period during which she had found herself unable to work with the quality of attention that work requires, going through the motions without the motivation, producing the forms without the feeling. She had recognized this as a signal, and she had responded to it by removing herself, carefully with the right conversations and arrangements made, from the environment that was producing it. The lighthouse cottage has 2 rooms. A main room that serves as kitchen, sitting area, and workspace, with a low ceiling, deep-set windows, and a range cooker that burns oil and heats the entire space so effectively that on most winter days she needs only 1 additional sweater. And a sleeping room beyond a half door, smaller, with a view north toward open water. The walls throughout are stone, thick enough that the wind, and there is always wind, is reduced to a distant conversation rather than an immediate assault. She has been here for 6 weeks when the winter arrives in earnest. And tonight, which is December, the particular night that the roughened shell preserves, the winter is very much in earnest. The wind is not violent. She has known violent wind on this coast, and this is not it. This is the sustained, purposeful wind of deep winter. Strong, cold, consistent, uninterested in drama. It moves around the lighthouse tower with a low, continuous note that changes pitch very slightly as the gusts within it vary, so that the sound is almost musical. Not melodic, but tonal, a chord that resolves and reforms. The windows in the cottage are thick glass and stone frames, and they hold without trouble, but you can feel the pressure of the wind against them, the subtle flecks of the glass. Outside it is snowing. Not the enormous visible flakes of a sheltered inland snowfall, but the fine driven snow of an exposed coast in winter. Small and hard and nearly horizontal in the wind, accumulating not in the soft drifts of picture book snow but in long thin streaks along the leeward side of the walls and rocks, wherever the wind deposits what it has been carrying. The lighthouse beam passes over it all at its regular interval, sweeping, 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 and in the seconds when the beam illuminates the falling snow, the air sparkles and then goes dark again. Inside the cottage, none of this is alarming. Eleanor is in her chair, a low, wide chair with upholstered arms that she had found in the corner of the cottage on her arrival, and which has since become the architectural center of her life here, with her feet on a small footstool and a book open in her lap. The range has been burning since morning, and the room has reached a temperature of such reliable, even warmth that she is in only one sweater, and has been for hours. On the shelf above the range, a small clock ticks. On the table beside her chair, a candle burns alongside the oil lamp, because she prefers the combination to either alone. She is reading about tidal ecology. Not because she has to, this is not a working stint, not a formal research period. She is reading it because she wants to, which is different, which is the way reading should always feel and so rarely does when it is obligatory. She reads a passage and then she stops and looks out the window at the darkness beyond the glass, not seeing much, just the wind-blurred reflection of the room behind her, and she thinks about it. Then she reads again. There is no schedule. There is no destination. There is just the book and the thinking and the warmth and the clock. The kettle on the range murmurs. She had filled it before she sat down, and it has been heating slowly for the past half hour, not yet at a full boil but approaching it in the leisurely way of kettles left to their own pace. In a few minutes it will announce itself, and she will rise and make her tea, not hurrying, not interrupting herself mid-page, but at the natural pause between one thought and the next, and she will return to the chair and the footstool and the book and the warmth. This is her life here, and she finds it extraordinary. She had expected the isolation to be difficult. She had expected the absence of colleagues and conversation, and the ordinary social friction of professional life to feel like deprivation. Does not feel like deprivation. Feels like respiration. As if she had been breathing shallowly for a long time and had arrived here to find that deep breathing was available. Had always been available, and she simply had not been in the right place to practice it. She had discovered in the first weeks at the lighthouse that she had opinions about solitude that turned out to be wrong. She had thought of it as a lack, the absence of people, the absence of conversation, the absence of the feedback loops of social existence. But solitude, she was finding, is not a lack. It is a presence, a specific quality of attention and awareness that becomes available when the attention is not required elsewhere, when the awareness is not occupied with the management of other people's needs and expectations. It is the quality that makes the wind's note interesting rather than merely loud. That makes the tick of the small clock resonant rather than merely audible. She had been spending her evenings simply being here, and she had realized that simply being here was enough, was more than enough. That there was more richness in one evening of genuine presence in a lit room with a good book and a fire and the sound of winter wind around the tower than in many months of crowded, obligatory, effortful social life. Nothing needs to happen, she had thought one evening, with the surprise of a person discovering something that should have been obvious. Not every evening. Not this one. The lighthouse beam swept past. The clock ticked. The kettle came gently, unhurriedly, to a boil. She rose from the chair, slowly without urgency, and moved to the range and lifted the kettle and poured the water over the tea leaves she had already placed in the pot. She did this without turning on any additional light. The range's glow and the candle and the lamp were enough, and she had learned the geography of this room as thoroughly as she had ever learned any space, so that she moved through it in the near dark with the ease of long familiarity. She carried the pot back to the small table beside the chair. She did not pour immediately. She let it steep, which required patience and rewarded it, and while it steeped she looked out the window at the snow. The lighthouse beam came around. It always took her slightly by surprise even when she was expecting it, a quality of light that did not so much arrive as simply be there, for an instant, before sweeping past and leaving the darkness again with a slightly heightened quality of contrast that follows a sudden illumination. Each sweep lasted perhaps 2 seconds from first edge to departure. Between sweeps, perhaps 12 seconds of dark. She had counted this many times. She had stopped counting and simply received it, the way one receives the interval between breaths, not measuring, just living within the rhythm. The snow that gathered on the window ledge outside was not decorative. It was the serious snow of a working coast in winter. Dense, compact, bluish-white in the lighthouse beam and simply dark in the intervals. It accumulated without ceremony and without the quality of event that snow in more sheltered places tends to have. Here it was simply what happened in December. The ledge outside her window held perhaps 4 centimeters of it, packed and flat, with a slight depression at the center where a bird. She suspected the same oyster catcher she had seen several times on the rocks below. Had been sitting at some point during the day, leaving the shallow, unmistakable impression of a resting body. She thought about the oyster catcher. She thought about it often, in the abstract way one thinks about the other lives being lived in one's immediate vicinity. The gull that nested every year in the same spot on the tower's leeward side. The pair of seals she occasionally saw on the flat rock below the causeway. The rabbit that appeared most evenings on the small patch of rough grass behind the cottage. She was sharing this island with a community of lives she did not intrude upon and which did not intrude upon her, and this seemed to her an ideal arrangement. A proximity without obligation, a companionship of presence rather than interaction. She poured her tea. She held the cup in both hands and felt the warmth move through her palms. She returned to the chair and the footstool and the book. She read for another hour in this way, and then another, and the fire settled and the candle burned lower and the wind around the tower maintained its continuous tonal conversation. And at some point she became aware that she was no longer reading but simply sitting, the book open in her lap at a page she had already finished, in a state of such complete and unfabricated ease that she was not quite awake and not quite asleep but something in between. The best state, the one most people are. Always too busy to reach. She found the roughened shell the following morning, on the wet shingle of the causeway after the tide had gone out. It was half buried in the pebbles, showing only its roughened edge, and she almost missed it. She dug it free with one finger and held it up and looked at it. All its wear, all its years, all the water that had passed over it, and she kept it. In the archive room, Eleanor set the roughened shell on her open palm and looked at it for a long while. 3 months in that cottage. 3 months of evenings exactly like this one. She had returned from the lighthouse with fewer certainties than she had arrived with, and a great deal more peace. And she had discovered that these two things are not inversely related, the way most educational traditions imply. You do not find peace by arriving at all the answers. You find it by becoming comfortable with the questions, by being willing to sit with the kettle and the clock and the wind and the lighthouse beam and let them be enough. Not provisional, not temporary, not an interlude before the real thing. Enough. The real thing itself. 3 months in that cottage. 91 nights. She had come back to herself there, slowly and without drama, the way ice comes back to liquid in warming water. Not a single moment of change, but a gradual reconstitution. She had gone back to her work in the spring and found it restored. The attention, the curiosity, the sustained engagement that makes science feel like a calling rather than a career. She had never gone back to the lighthouse, but she had never stopped being grateful for it. She placed the shell carefully back in its drawer. Deeper now. Your breath is very slow. The warmth of the cottage is around you. The range, the candle, the clock, the wind as background, held at a safe distance by thick stone. There is nothing that needs you tonight. There is no next thing. There is only this, and it is enough. Let yourself go further. Let the lighthouse beam sweep over you and move on, and when it has gone, rest in the dark that follows. You are very deep now. If you find yourself drifting away from the words entirely, let that happen. The sounds can carry you even where the words cannot follow. Let them. The fire is very low. Just coals now, a deep, settled glow that no longer flickers. The lamp on the table still burns, but the room around its light seems darker than before, the shadows having moved in closer during the hours Eleanor has been sitting here. She does not mind the shadows. She has never been afraid of the dark in its ordinary form, only of the kind of dark that comes from the absence of the right things, which is a different matter entirely. She opens the 5th drawer. Her hand finds the shell without searching. It is a small shell, very smooth, with a warmth to its surface that does not entirely come from the warmth of the room. She has carried this one in her jacket pocket for most of a year before placing it in the drawer. It remembers the shape of her hand the way worn things remember handling. She is 60 years old. The research vessel she is on, the last research vessel she will ever sail on, though she does not know this yet. She is not the kind of person who announces endings in advance, even to herself, is called the Athena, and it is heading home. After 18 years of seagoing research, after hundreds of days aboard vessels of various sizes and purposes and degrees of comfort, she is making her last voyage. She does not frame it that way in the moment. She simply knows, with a kind of quiet certainty that does not require explanation, that this is the last time. It is late afternoon. The sea they are crossing is the Aegean. Her sea, the sea she was born beside. The sea she learned first and returned to at the end as naturally as a compass needle finds north. They are southward bound toward Athens, and the sun is setting in the west. Off the starboard quarter, laying its light across the water at a low, oblique angle that turns everything it touches to versions of gold. The gold of the sea is not uniform. It varies with the depth of the water and the angle of each wave face, and the particular quality of the light as it makes its long passage through the low, thick atmosphere of the day's end. Some patches of water are the deep, saturated gold of old metal, almost orange. Others are pale and bright, almost white. Between them, in the places where the wave faces turn away from the sun, the water is a deep purple blue. Not dark, not cold, but complex, the color of something that contains both warmth and depth simultaneously. Eleanor is standing at the stern rail. Not leaning, standing with her hands resting lightly on the rail. Her weight balanced with the easy unconscious competence of someone who has spent a long time at sea. She is watching the light on the water. She has been watching it for perhaps 20 minutes, and she will watch it for perhaps 20 more, until the sun is gone and the sky has moved through its sequence into the deep blue of a Mediterranean evening, when the first stars will appear and the water will become dark, and the air will begin to carry its nocturnal coolness. The wind is light, just enough to lift her hair at the sides and to put a slight chop on the water, and to make the standing at the rail experience one of mild, pleasant physical sensation. The coolness on her face, the resistance against her jacket, the faint smell of the open sea that is always cleaner and more elemental farther from shore. It is a forgiving wind, this evening wind. The kind of wind that helps rather than resists. Behind her, on the covered deck, two of her colleagues are at the equipment table, doing the last of the day's data entry. She can hear their voices. Not the words, just the rhythm and cadence of scientific conversation, unhurried and professional. She knows them both well. She is fond of them, but she does not join them tonight. She has been thinking about the sea. Specifically, she has been thinking about what she knows of it. The accumulated knowledge of nearly 4 decades of study, the papers and the data sets and the findings and the theories revised and the conclusions drawn. And she has been experiencing a feeling that she has no precise scientific vocabulary for, and which she finds quietly amusing in its resistance to categorization. She has been thinking, I have spent my life trying to explain this, and the sea has never asked to be explained. It is not a critical thought. It is not a deflation of the work, which she values and will stand behind until she can no longer stand anywhere. But it is a recognition. The sea does not care about her understanding of it. The sea is not performing for her instruments or confirming her hypotheses. It is doing what it has always done. Moving, breathing, carrying its enormous cargo of life and chemistry and physical force, entirely indifferent to whether anyone comprehends it or not. And the feeling this gives her, which she would not have predicted, is not humility in the diminishing sense. It is freedom. She had spent her career measuring, quantifying, categorizing and classifying and naming and recording. All of this had been valuable, genuinely valuable, and she would not undo any of it. But standing here at the stern rail in the last light of this last expedition, she was finally, completely, allowing herself to simply look. To let the gold water be gold water. To let the light be light. Not evidence, not data, not a system to be understood. Just the sea. Just the evening. Just the feeling of standing here. The sun was very low now. She could look almost directly at it, the atmosphere having thickened enough to filter its intensity, and it sat on the horizon like something deeply, gravely present. A disk of warm amber, slightly flattened by the refraction of the low-angle air, its reflection on the water below it a broken, shimmering column of the same amber, stretching from the horizon to the stern of the ship. In a few minutes, it would touch the horizon line. In a few minutes more, it would be gone. She watched it touch. The moment a sun touches the horizon is a particular moment. Not dramatic, not sudden, not loud, but specific in the way that certain moments are specific. A transition that you can see happening, that takes place on a timescale perceptible to human attention, that allows you to observe change in real time. The disk was half there, half below. The water at the horizon line bright and agitated with reflected color, then 3/4 below, then just the last cap of amber, and then, but not gone. The sky above the vanished sun still held its color, a spreading warmth of orange and rose that climbed the western sky and caught the undersides of the few clouds there and turned them the color of something interior, something alive. The sea below this sky received the color and translated it. The gold became rose, became copper, became, at the edges, a deep and complex purple blue. Something released in her chest as she watched this. Something that had been held, quietly, without her full knowledge, for a very long time. Let go. Not dramatically. Without announcement. Simply. A tension she had not known she was carrying dissolved. The way certain knots loosen not when you pull at them but when you stop pulling and simply leave them in warm water for long enough. What replaced the release was not emptiness but its exact opposite. A fullness. A sense of space opening outward from somewhere inside her rather than contracting from without. As though the chest could expand to contain the color of the sky, the width of the water, the long, undemanding fact of the sea. The sea does not want to be understood, she thought. It wants to be felt. She had written, in papers and reports and textbooks, about the sea as system. As chemistry, as physics, as ecology, as the medium in which life had originated and in which a greater diversity of life still existed than in all the terrestrial environments combined. She believed all of this. She would go on believing it, would go on doing the work of documenting and understanding and publishing until she retired, and she would be glad of every year of it. But understanding and feeling are not the same country. And she had spent 40 years becoming expert in one and, she realized now, keeping a careful professional distance from the other. She was 60 years old, standing at the stern rail of her last research vessel, and she was allowing herself to feel it. The rose sky, the dark breathing water, the wind just enough to be present, the ship moving steadily homeward. And the feeling which she would not have known how to predict, which no paper she had ever read described, which her 40 years of careful training had not prepared her for, was peace. Simple, unmixed, unprecedented peace. The kind that does not need anything to be different. The kind that asks nothing. The kind that simply is. She stayed at the rail until the sky had deepened to indigo and the first stars had appeared. 3 of them, faint and tentative, in the east. And then she went below and made a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the small research lounge and did not think about anything in particular, which was, she found, very easy to do when one had just been standing at the stern of a ship watching the Aegean at sunset for the first time, truly, in 40 years. She found the small smooth shell the following morning, after they docked in Piraeus, and she had slipped away alone while her colleagues were dealing with equipment and paperwork, walking down through the harbor to the thin strip of shore below the old sea wall. The morning was cool and clear, the early light on the water doing a quieter version of the previous evening's transformation. The shell was in the tidal-line, half covered with wet sand, warm despite the morning air. She picked it up and held it in her palm, and it felt, immediately, like something she had been meant to find. She put it in her pocket and walked back along the shore, listening to the small waves come and go. In the archive room, she held the smooth shell in her open palm and looked at the low, settled coals in the fireplace. The sea does not want to be explained. It wants to be felt. She had come to understand in the 18 years since that evening that this was true of most things worth knowing. The particular quality of an afternoon, the weight of a person's hands, the color of the light in a room where you were once, briefly and completely, at rest. These things are not explained. They are felt, or they are not known at all. Your body has no weight now. You are entirely still. The gold of that sea is still with you, warm, wide, unhurried. The wind is light on your face. You are asleep, or nearly. It is the last night of the autumn. Tomorrow will be November. Eleanor knows this from the quality of the dark outside the window, a particular density, a particular completeness, and from the way the fire has been burning tonight, which is with the deeper, more sustained commitment of a fire on a cold night rather than a merely cool one. The stone walls of the house have made their seasonal adjustment. They held the summer warmth through September and much of October, and now they have surrendered it and begun to hold the cold instead, which is their other function, equally important. She has been in the archive room for a long time. She is not tired exactly. This is one of the gifts of age that nobody mentions when they list the gifts of age, which is a short list mostly. The capacity to sit in a chair by a fire for a long time without needing the sitting to be productive or the time to be accounted for. She has earned this capacity through the decades of sitting in chairs by fires with papers to read and data to review and decisions to make. And she exercises it now without guilt and without apology. She has done tonight what she only rarely does. She has opened all the drawers. Not to take anything out, not yet. Just to open them one by one, and to look at the contents, and to remember not the individual memories but the shape of the whole collection, the arc of it, a life rendered in calcium and salt, a biography of moments that could not be photographed or recorded but that have survived, somehow, in the things she carried home in her pockets. She looks at the shells for a long time. Then she closes the drawers one by one and goes to the back of the room. There is a wooden box here that does not look like the other drawers. It is smaller, older, and it sits on its own shelf separate from the archive units, at roughly the level of her hand when her arm hangs at her side. It was made of olive wood many decades ago, by a man who knew how to work with his hands. She does not open it often, but tonight she lifts it down carefully and carries it to her chair and holds it in her lap. Inside the box is one shell. Not the first shell she ever collected. There were others before the archive, before the understanding of what she was doing, that she carried and then lost or left behind in the unself-conscious way of childhood. But the first shell she was given, the first one she kept deliberately, knowingly, with the full weight of intent. Her father gave it to her. She was 7 years old. He had placed it in her palm without explanation, just a gesture of the kind that people make when they want to give something and do not need to account for the giving. He had found it himself, on a morning when he had gone out before she was awake, on a beach she had never seen and he described only as being very far to the east. The shell was pale pink at the outer edge, deepening to rose at the interior, with a spiral of exceptional regularity and a surface worn smooth by a long time in moving water. He had said simply, "Hold it to your ear." She had held it to her ear, and she had heard the sea. Not this specific sea. Not the small bay with the fishing boats, not the beach she knew. She had heard what seemed to her to be a much larger sea. Deeper, wider, older. The resonance of the air inside the shell had become, to her 7-year-old ears, the voice of something immeasurably ancient and very calm. She had stood with the shell pressed to her ear for a long time, much longer than a 7-year-old usually stands still for anything, and when she finally lowered it, she had looked at her father with an expression he described to her years later as one of the most serious he had ever seen on a child's face. "What is that sound?" she had asked. "That's the sound the sea makes when nobody is watching," he had said. "When it thinks it's alone." She had kept the shell. Now she holds it up in both hands. Not to her ear, not yet. Just looking at it. The pink and rose of it, the worn smoothness of the surface, the spiral that has not changed in 71 years because spirals don't change, they just are, they contain their own geometry the way good things contain their nature. She thinks about her father. He has been gone for 30 years. Longer than many of the friendships she has made and kept. She does not grieve him acutely anymore. Grief does not stay acute. It becomes instead a permanent feature of the landscape, something that is simply there, that one navigates around with the ease of long familiarity. But she feels his presence tonight in the way she most often does. Not as an absence, but as something still present in her, in the way she approaches the sea, in the patience she brings to work that requires patience, in the understanding she has always carried, sometimes dormant, sometimes very near the surface, that freedom is knowing where you belong. She raises the shell to her ear. She is 7 years old. She is also 78. Both things are true simultaneously, which is the particular property of the memories in these shells. They do not replace the present but inhabit it alongside, so that she can be both the child who has never been away and the old woman who has gone everywhere and come home. She is in the boat. Not the fishing boat with the net. Not the boat of the beach memory. A smaller boat. A rowing boat, flat-bottomed, low in the water. Her father is at the oars. They are not far from shore. She can see the white walls of the houses along the waterfront, the dock with its boats. But far enough that the land seems separate, another world, something she has left behind for the duration of this morning, which is early, the sun still low, the air still cool, the water smooth and dark below them. Her father rows without hurry. The oars enter the water with a clean sound and a small swirl, and he pulls and they move, and then the oars come forward again, lifting clear, dripping briefly, and enter again. The rhythm of it is hypnotic. The boat moves through the still water in a way that seems almost effortless, as if the water is glad to receive them. She is sitting in the bow, facing him. She is watching his face, which is the face of someone completely occupied by something they love. Not the face of concentration, not the face of effort, but the face of engagement, which is softer and steadier than either. He is looking past her at something on the water, or perhaps at nothing in particular, at the quality of this morning, at the specific combination of light and air and movement that constitutes a good early hour on the sea. He is not saying anything. He will say something eventually. He will tell her things about the sea, about the fish, about the sky and what it promises, but not yet. Right now he is simply rowing and she is simply watching, and the boat is simply moving through the calm water, and the morning is simply being this morning. Early, cool, quiet, unrepeatable. She will spend the next 7 decades learning that the world is large. She will go to northern seas and cross the Atlantic and navigate scientific conferences in 4 languages and write papers that will be read by people she will never meet. She will accumulate an understanding of marine systems that a 9-year-old in a small Aegean town could not have imagined. She will be lost and found and lonely and accompanied and satisfied and restless, in the proportions that make up an honest life. And at the end of it, in this chair, in this room, on this night, she knows something with a completeness that only very long lives permit you to know. Every journey she has taken has brought her back here. Not literally. She has not lived in this bay, has not seen this morning again. But the quality of it, the unrequired stillness, the presence of someone loved, the small boat on calm water, the complete sufficiency of this one moment, that quality has been what she has been seeking in every place she has gone. In the rain on the library window, in the midnight light of the northern sea, in the lighthouse cottage, in the golden last voyage on the Aegean. She has been seeking it and finding pieces of it and collecting them in shells and carrying them home. She has been circling back to this boat her entire life, and it has been there the whole time, right here in the small wooden box, right here in the first shell, which is also the last. She lowers the shell from her ear. The coals in the fireplace are almost gone. The lamp is burning low. Outside the window, the rain has entirely stopped, and in the sudden quiet that rain's absence creates, she can hear, clearly now, unmistakably, the sea below the cliff. The slow, immense, unhurried sound of it against the rocks. The sound it makes when it thinks nobody is listening. The sound it has been making since before there was anyone to listen and will make long after. She holds the pink and rose shell in her open hands. She is not sad. She is not nostalgic in the painful sense. Not reaching after something that is gone. What she feels is more like completion. Not the completion of something ending, but the completion of something that has been gradually becoming clear and has now become entirely simply clear. That all the distances were journeys home, that all the shells in all the drawers of her small archive are, in the end, the same shell, holding the same quality of peace. That her father, who taught her to listen, was right about everything that mattered. She returns the pink shell to the olive wood box and closes it carefully. She does not return it to the shelf. She holds it in her lap, both hands around it, feeling the smoothness of old wood, the warmth of a container that has held something precious for a very long time. Outside the sea. The fire goes to its last warmth. The lamp is still. And in the small archive room in the stone house at the edge of the cliff, Eleanor Arvanitis sits with her hands around the box that holds the first shell, and listens to the sea below, and closes her eyes. All the distances were the same distance. All the shorelines led to this one. All the waters in the end are the same water. The same ancient, patient, unhurried water that was here before the boats and will be here after, that asks for nothing and gives everything, that does not want to be explained, that only wants to be felt. The sea breathes in, the sea breathes out, and the night is very quiet and very still, and everything that was found is found, and everything that was kept is kept. And there is nothing more tonight that needs to be said or done or understood. Only this. Only the breathing of the sea. Only the dark behind your eyes, which is warm and deep and entirely your own. Sleep well. Sleep deeply.